We're now moving on. I'd like to invite Tiffany Morrison. Tiffany's presentation is Political Dynamics and Governance of World Heritage Ecosystems. Thanks, Tiffany.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Thanks for all our previous speakers and audience for such an insightful discussion today, and also to Michelle and Cindy for all their organisational manoeuvrings and the AV team. I'm presenting here today from the lands of the Wulgurukaba and Bindal people, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all joining from online. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a political geographer working on improving the governance of resource-dependent systems. When I first arrived in the ARC Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies in 2015, the governance of the reef was rightly known as an international success story. The 2004 rezoning, in particular, had received more than 19 national and international prizes, including for Best Plan, Best Public Participation, and so forth. But while management while management of conservation and sustainable fishing and tourism was world-class, other threats were growing, including increasing mining activity and coastal land use change in the wider catchment draining into the reef, as well as the growing impacts of global climate change. So I commenced a study on the wider governance regime, on how the wider governance regime was grappling with these cumulative demands. I was interested in how the increasing structural complexity of the regime was shaping its overall effectiveness. During the course of the study in 2015, the reef was proposed for a World Heritage in Danger listing by UNESCO, but managed to avoid such a listing. You will recall that the following year saw the worst coral bleaching in the world's history, yet the GBR again remained off UNESCO's list of ecosystems in danger. Scientists, managers and policymakers seemed to agree that while there was a high level of concern about rising threats to the reef, there were also disadvantages to an in danger listing, such as the effect on tourism. However, this consensus did not appear to be based on a structured decision-making process, nor did it seem to be based on experience with in danger listings in other places. So I decided to undertake a global longitudinal analysis of every UNESCO decision for all 238 World Heritage ecosystems since 1972. Ambitious, especially for a qualitative social scientist. I wanted to ask, how do threatened ecosystems compare across the World Heritage portfolio? Why and how do some countries avoid an in danger listing and others gain? Ultimately, I was interested in how UNESCO could improve global stewardship of climate-impacted ecosystems like the GBR. Now, World Heritage decisions are a complex research subject because they are a relational and fluid exercise which occurs over many years and multiple scales. National governments are ultimately responsible for implementing ecosystem protection under the 1972 World Heritage Convention, of which approximately 200 governments are signatory. Formal deliberations occur at annual World Heritage meetings occurring in different member countries every year, based on decisions made by a rotating committee comprised of 21 countries. They make these decisions based on information received from national governments, the IUCN, which is the formal advisory body, and other scientists, UNESCO reactive monitoring missions and NGO petitions. The in danger list is essentially the teeth of the convention. It works to identify sites facing major problems, direct international attention and technical and financial assistance towards those sites, and encourage nation states to undertake corrective action. The study was therefore, by necessity, a mixed method study of a multi-scale phenomenon, bridging theories of international relations with concepts from human geography, political science, development studies, and ecology. And you can see Cindy there on the far right, if you look closely. We were lucky enough to be able to draw together an international team with experience in these fields and in working with international policymakers and ecosystem managers. First, we compiled a database of 238 World Heritage areas that were certified for their natural or mixed natural and cultural significance. We had access to a publicly accessible, searchable database maintained by the World Heritage Centre in Paris, which allowed us to trace World Heritage decisions in 102 countries over 47 years. Then we combined World Heritage in Danger certification patterns with site threat records and rates of UNESCO threat reporting. Finally, we examined data on national governance quality, economic complexity and key stakeholder perspectives to understand the political dynamics and ecosystem impacts of different responses. We used data from the IMF, the World Bank, the MIT Complexity Index and triangulated these data with results from in-depth interviews with World Heritage experts. Our focus was on examining the different strategies used by national governments to respond to or to avoid in-danger listings. What we found is that in-danger listings have stalled since 2000, despite increasing numbers of sites on the overall World Heritage List and despite rising reported threats. We also found that 41 sites have never been certified as in danger, despite reported threats that are equal to or higher intensity than those that have been certified as in danger. We found that different national signatories exhibited a spectrum of responses ranging from negotiation, compliance and appropriation at the top end of the spectrum to rhetorical adoption and passive resistance at the bottom end of the spectrum. So it's the top and the bottom here. For the purposes of concision, I'm going to bundle these into two types of relationships between national signatories and UNESCO, productive and counterproductive. Note that the relationship we are referring to here is between the national signatories and UNESCO. Most local management authorities like Gabrumpa are world-class in protected area management, and in-danger listing is designed to help, not undermine, these authorities. We found that most, that is about 74% of sites were involved in productive responses to the threat of a potential in-danger listing. In the Everglades in the US, for example, the Clinton administration actually requested an in-danger listing in 1993 in order to force local industries to better manage coastal development. In Belize, the reef reserve system was listed as in danger in 2009. By 2018, mangrove coverage was restored to 1996 levels, with clearing in protected areas almost entirely curtailed and the whole maritime zone under an oil and gas moratorium. In Denmark, the glacier has never been listed as in danger, and the relationship between Denmark and UNESCO is characterised by transparent and regular reporting, with a 2018 management plan that explicitly addresses the effects of climate changing on the fjord's glacier.
Hey, Tiffany, you are at 7 minutes.
I'm not ready, God. By contrast, I'll be quick, only about 26% of sites were involved in more counterproductive relationships. These included, for example, Halong Bay in Vietnam, which is technically in danger but has never even been proposed for an in danger listing. The World Bank has taken over coordination of all activities in that area since 1998. Cameroon's faunal reserve, which is also technically in danger but has narrowly avoided listing 5 times through use of delaying tactics. The Great Barrier Reef Australia, which is also technically in danger but narrowly avoided listing in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015 and 2021 by developing multiple local sustainability plans and lobbying committee member countries. The GBR will be considered again for an in danger listing in 2022 on the grounds of severe coral bleaching, poor water quality and national inaction on climate change. This small number of sites also includes the Donana wetlands in Spain, the Western Caucasus in Russia and the 3 parallel rivers of Hunan in China, which have also been repeatedly proposed for an in danger listing due to mining, forestry, dams and other large developments, but have repeatedly opposed and avoided such listing through partial compliance and symbolic commitments. The point here is not to criticise these counterproductive relationships between national signatories and UNESCO, but to understand if there are general patterns that can explain why they occur and what can be done about it. Unfortunately, UNESCO's own reporting on governance threats could not help us in this regard. This is because UNESCO tends to assume, just like the IMF, that counterproductive governance dynamics only occur in less advanced economies. To understand the reasons behind these counterproductive relationships across all economies, we found it more helpful to study the MIT Economic Complexity Index and World Bank natural resource exports as a percentage of total exports. What these results show is that certain economies have stronger incentives to avoid international intervention and oversight due to their economic reliance on a small number of high-value natural resource industries. Put simply, the prevalence of powerful industries in capturing decision makers to prevent an in danger listing is prevalent in all countries with a high dependence on a small number of natural resource industries, like mining. This is as true for OECD countries like Australia and Spain as it is for developing and emerging economies. We also found that climate change is fast becoming an urgent international relations problem for UNESCO. Traditionally, UNESCO has avoided and delegated climate decisions to the Intergovernmental Panel and UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Climate reporting on individual World Heritage reef sites has typically lagged by up to 10 years behind known and reported climate impacts. However, this situation is changing as I speak. In February 2020, a consortium of 76 organisations and individuals successfully petitioned UNESCO to consider climate change in its World Heritage decisions. A small group of member states, including Australia, responded by claiming that UNESCO should not supersede national sovereignty on climate. So what can we learn from these international patterns? First, the good news is that counterproductive strategies are due to a small group of nations who block in danger listings for climate-impacted properties using lobbying, rhetoric, symbolism and placebo policies. Most countries support productive relationships with UNESCO. Second, many sites have gained from an in-danger listing, sites like the Everglades, the Galapagos and Belize. Third, global stewards like UNESCO and concerned observers are working to change governance for the better to safeguard all ecosystems. A nascent international network of NGOs known as World Heritage Watch hopes to supply more oversight and monitoring of self-interested states. Scientists and non-profit organisations, some of whom are in this room, are using vulnerability assessment, remote sensing and citizen science to track and expose degradation of protected areas and hold governments accountable for protection and adaptation planning. And in December, for the first time this year, UNESCO and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change will meet, and a new draft UNESCO policy that clearly states that climate-related degradation of a World Heritage Area can be used as the basis for an in danger listing will be considered for ratification at the UNESCO General Assembly. In summary, World Heritage and the use of World Heritage as another means to push for environment and climate action is an ongoing project. There is no way of predicting whether UNESCO will ratify its climate policy later this year or list the GBR as in danger next year. But as a dynamic new normal emerges for the reef and the harsh geopolitics of climate change continue to intensify, a future research question for many of us here today should be, do we need to reconceptualise a World Heritage in danger listing for the reef? Thank you.
Was there any burning questions for Tiff? She did use up all her time.
You can catch me at drinks.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. Thanks, Tiffany. And just a reminder to our online participants, you can put questions in the Zoom and we will collect your questions and comments, and we can also ask your questions if we have time in their session today. Thank you very much, Tiffany.